All right. So I'm Danial Rahman. I'll be your panel moderator, and we've got a very interesting panel for you today. The title we had is social learning social enough? And I think this is a nice flow on from David's keynote earlier, where I noticed there were a number of questions on social learning. So we do have a Slido. Do we have a Slido for this one? There you go. It's Code Panel 1. So feel free to send in your questions. What we'll also do is we'll also take questions from the audience. Because we're running a little bit behind time, so I'm going to be very strict with my panelists. Lara was just telling me how she likes to micro-manage the time. Micro-timing. But apparently it doesn't work. It will work today, Lara. And what we'll do is we'll do about 20 minutes of moderated Q&A, followed by about 25 minutes to half an hour of questions from the audience. So we'd like to have more from you. To introduce, I've got a very distinguished panel, all very experienced individuals. Immediately to my right is Professor Dr. Rosna Awang Hashim from Universiti Utara, Malaysia. I've been to the university, it's a beautiful campus, a couple of times. She is a motivation scientist and educational psychologist. She's also the editor-in-chief of the Malaysian Journal of Learning and Instruction, our journal partner for this conference, so let's give them a round of applause. And very interestingly, she's also developing an instrument to measure undergraduate learning experience. And I'll be asking you about that in a bit, because that's something that's very, very interesting. Next to her is Professor Mushtak Al-Atabi, the CEO and Provost of Heriot-Watt University Malaysia campus, a dear friend of mine. We've known each other for a while now, Mushtak. An engineer by training. He's very passionate about the mental well-being, emotional state of students, and he was also one of the first creators of MOOCs in Malaysia, or one of the first MOOCs in Malaysia. The first MOOC in Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, Mushtak. Cool. And next to him, we have Dr. Lara Moroko from the Graduate School of Management at Macquarie University, and she is the academic lead at the incubator, University Incubator, and she focuses on learner-centric programs for entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, also someone who does training for the corporate side as well, very, very experienced. What I really like is her profile photo. She's always smiling, right? So I'm very excited to meet her, and our brief chats earlier, definitely a very infectious individual in a good way. I mean, you know what I mean, come on. All right, so without further ado, let's kick it off. And I will give you, I think, all 3 minutes each. The first question is not what I prepared and sent to all of you earlier. It's a slightly different one. Curveball. Sorry, sir. Okay. Actually, it's a bit more, after David's presentation, I wanted to ask a bit more, it's kind of like a broader question. So the question is, what does social learning mean to you in the context of its challenges and possibilities or promise? So, who would like to begin? 3 minutes each. All right.
Thank you, Daniel. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning. What is social learning? Well, what does it mean to me? To me, social learning is learning in the company of others. Whether it's face-to-face or online, doesn't really matter. So long there is a group of people working together, exchanging ideas, that is social. And also not necessarily participating, but also observing. Because role modeling, imitation is also learning. So it's very social. The challenges, how can we motivate learners to really be engaged in the classroom especially? Online, let alone online, is even more challenging because you never know whether they are engaged or not. I think that the challenge is how to design the learning experience that can really provoke their interest, curiosity to engage in the co-construction of knowledge. Simple, right? Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think I would answer in a very similar way. So I'll probably just focus on the maybe challenges and the opportunities. I think the challenge is it's very difficult to achieve from a sort of a lecturer point of view. It's very difficult. It's much easier to stand and deliver, and we can say that my job is done as a teacher or as an academic. while to pass or share the power with the learners is a very messy process, very, very risky process. And the risk would be we won't finish the curriculum. How would some of the learner would abuse the power? These are real things that will happen when we do social learning, which is learning with others and with empowerment for the learners.
Thanks. I agree. I think social learning, I think of it as coming from an innovation and sort of entrepreneurship perspective. I think of it a lot as human-centered learning. So it's the idea that when the learners engage with the learning, that they're not empty vessels for us to fill with what we have decided that the vessel should be filled with, that they're actually people with lives and experiences, that they, as you say, they can co-construct the learning with their peers. And as you say, with the facilitators, with the lecturers, with the subject matter experts. So for me, social learning is that the great liberating component is that everybody is already coming with something to share, and that they're willing to share. The great challenge is that as academics, we're not used to sharing. We're not used to sharing the limelight, the insights. We're not used to handling sometimes the rabble of social learning of making sure everyone's voices are heard and the input is appropriate. But the great thing is it means that because everybody's sharing, and we don't actually, for a learning experience, we don't need to have the big one genius. It's much more of a democratized way of learning where we can sort of crowdsource what's going into the learning experience.
Thank you very much. All the questions were done in, I think, less than 6 minutes. Very good, panel. Good for first round. Just coming off from what Lara was mentioning. So earlier in David's speech, he talked about from becoming sage on the stage to guide on the side. However, in an Asian context and approach to learning, which can be a bit more conventional or traditional, we have the concept of a guru where you're learning from someone. And the idea is if you don't learn from someone, you're not really learning. So what are your thoughts on this? And do you think then is social constructivism ideal or is it overrated?
Me first. Oh, this is a hard one. Well, I think that for really good learning experiences, we need to understand the perceptions and the anticipated outcomes for the learner. So while I'm a huge believer in co-creation of educational experiences, I think it's folly to think that every learner comes into that experience going, oh, I know how to co-create, I know how to contribute, I'm going to forget all of my culture, all of my previous experiences, all of my expectations, and just join in as if I had been a social learner for the last decade. I don't think that's appropriate. And similarly for the academics as well. So I think that what we can do to enable a new generation of learners is actually take them along a journey, understand where they're coming from as learning users, and help them, give them a role, some guidelines, model behaviour, practice behaviour, so they can become part of a learning tribe and possibly break down those barriers. But I don't think it happens well and naturally if you don't put the effort in to helping the learners understand what their role is in the process and how they can contribute to the learning process.
All right, thank you. Just a very quick, I suppose, yes or no question. Does social learning encourage critical thinking in that regard? Like independent critical thinking?
Yes, and
okay, yeah.
And it needs to be scaffolded. So for some people it will be
scaffolded, yeah.
Some people will be automatic, and some people would need a pathway with little chunks of practice to get to happy critical thinking and sharing.
All right, thank you. Moving on, Professor Rosna. So it was mentioned that you are developing an instrument to measure the student's learning experience, right? I think two parts to this question. Number one, how has that instrument been? Because we all know at the end of the semester, those of us, we have to assess our educators, right? We fill in a form. Back in university, I had to do that. I didn't quite believe it because I was afraid if I said something negative or not constructive about a lecturer, I will face the repercussions of it. Especially when it was in pencil, I didn't have to put my name. But when it was online, it was attached to my student ID. So I would tend to edit it a little bit more. Right. So the first part of that question would be, how has that instrument or the pilot been? Number one. But number two, do you see the output or the input from the instrument actually leading towards creating better social learning experiences?
Okay, you mentioned two things actually. The first one, you are referring to student rating of instruction, or 3, SRI. Course evaluation. In Malaysia, we call it course evaluation, end of the semester. That is different. That is a rating of the teaching, quality of teaching, not the quality of learning. Because most of the time, if you notice, the items, 20, 15 items, talk about what teachers does. It's not what they do. So what we are doing now is more student-centric. Actually, we are commissioned by the Ministry of Education, from the Utara team. We are revising the SSI, Student Satisfaction Index, used for rating, university rating. So you have to bear in mind, some percentage, between 6 to 8% of the outcome of SSI will be part of the rating instrument for Malaysia. So I commented a lot on the previous one, so the commission need to develop the instrument, to revise the instrument. So actually, what we're doing here is we're developing an instrument that can drive learning. Okay, it's not so much about the instructor or the teachers, it's so much about what they do in the classroom. Over the last 4 years, can they report their learning experience? For instance, we were guided by the principle of good undergraduate practice, and also student development from the developmental psychological perspective. What works during the undergraduate that can prepare graduates or to make them job ready for the job after, or not just the job, for their life skills in that sense. So we are looking at how teachers influence or make an impact to students' life from student-faculty interaction, and then peers interaction, peer learning, how did they learn from peers, and then inclusive practice in terms of diversity exposure, the extent that they're being exposed to global issues. We are talking about developing global mindset of the learners, and things like supportive ecosystem on campus. Do we have it? So inshallah, we are doing our pilot 2 now. We have done pilot 1. So now until end of this month, we are doing pilot 2, and we have selected about 23 universities, public and private. I think some of you are involved. We wrote through the Ministry of Education.
Some of them might have questions about this later.
Okay, good. We are still piloting. When you pilot, of course, you need a lot of items. We started with 80 items, but definitely we are going to trim down to, I cannot say now, so long it can't, to a certain extent, rate quality of learning, and not simply for the sake of rating, but also can drive learning.
Okay, just a very quick question, if I may then interrupt, I'm sorry. There's something very subjective, right, about an experiential type of feedback system. And by and large, then it also depends on the kind of students that you speak to or get the feedback from. And since we're talking about scaling quality education, what then would the university or the ministry be doing to scale the ability to get as much feedback or as much data as possible? What are your thoughts on that?
Are you referring to the same instrument, right?
Yeah, scaling the instrument's reach.
Yeah, I think the instrument is not about feeling, it's about the actual behavior.
Right.
We use frequency count. How often do you discuss about global issues? And that's not the exact item. I cannot remember.
That's okay. Yeah,
things like that. Very frequent, very seldom, all the time. Meaning that are they exposed? Do they use a lot of integrative reflective thinking during the 4 years undergraduate experience. So frequent. It's about frequency count. Right. So I think the information will be very rich. We can look at the item level or at the construct level that can drive the university. Hey, you're not doing enough in this. The frequency reporting by students in doing reflective thinking is very low for your department or for your university. Let's buckle up. Things like that. I'm very positive from the framework we are taking. We did also mixed method actually, interview the stakeholders, expert in teaching, and also from students' perspective. And we also, of course, travel a bit to overseas to get some perspective. And inshallah, I think we got the right framework that can inform university how to improve quality teaching.
So this is very new then?
From my perspective, we have not been doing enough. Okay. I've been doing research on that, but I have not been able to penetrate the ministry. And alhamdulillah, now I'm able to penetrate.
Fantastic. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I thought that was actually quite an interesting area. And now I'd like to move on to Professor Mushtak. Oh, look at him, so confident. I think also related to the theme about being social learning. So having launched the first MOOC in Malaysia, how were you, so, there was no, I suppose, local reference points. They're probably international reference points, first and foremost. But secondly, having launched it a couple of years ago, how has that influenced your current MOOC design thinking and approach to creating MOOCs and, maximizing that social learning experience?
The first MOOC was launched in 2013, and it was really sort of an accident for me to launch the MOOC. I just started to hear about this term MOOC, and I was preparing a course for engineering students, and I thought of maybe I should offer a MOOC. And there's a bit of story around that. I just sent naively emails to edX and Coursera, and there was, when I did the search, there was something called OpenLearning. I haven't heard of it before. So I say, let me see who's going to respond first. Well, Adam responded, I think, in 3 hours. And the next day we were having a Skype discussing about what to put in the MOOC. So I think what has happened is I realized the power of putting people from different parts of the world together. And if the activities that we put are well designed, well thought through, and if the instructor is flexible enough to actually change things as they go, so they seek feedback and then immediately could change things, I think the power is tremendous. And OpenLearning was...
So immediacy of feedback, that's important.
Well, it's not only the feedback to the learners, but feedback to you as an instructor. So if something doesn't work, you just remove it. Or if something that is proving to work, then you do more of. And back then, I think I was the star academic for OpenLearning. So they actually used to develop tools for Adam? Me. Not anymore, yeah, but yes. I think it's great. Yeah. Well. Honestly, what we did back then was I said, look, this needs to appear in that way, and they quickly even programmed tools based on the stuff that we have been seeing. I give you an example of something that we did together. We wanted to have a truly global MOOC, and then it was about entrepreneurship, and we worked a league table whereby we said if 1 out of every 100,000 people in every country joined the MOOC, we would be having, I don't know how many million people there. So we created a sort of like a league table with medals for the countries as more people join. And the top country was Qatar, because they are a very small, they have a very small population, and their entire University of Qatar, I think, joined that. And then suddenly there are people who are going out there and say, please ask more people to join this MOOC, because there is this, it's become a national pride kind of thing. So you talk about social learning and social, working socially with everyone, even to join the course. There's so many innovations, and these things had to be, really designed specifically for that MOOC that we did. So it really, personally, as an educator, it opened my eyes, and it impacted everything I did after that. Not only in the online space, but even in the face-to-face instruction. I'm more willing now to share the power with the learners. We created more avenues for the learners to, they themselves, for example, issue badges and even create parts of the course. So there are actually, if you go to my courses, there are certain key elements of that. So, for example, when we run the emotional intelligence MOOC, I noticed that many great stories are coming through. People are getting a job because of the MOOC, getting married because of the MOOC, and all sorts of things.
Getting married?
Yeah. Right? Yes. I'll talk about that in my workshop later. So please come for the workshop. Yeah, more stories to come.
More stories in the workshop.
Yeah. But what we did was, one of the students say, why don't we create a corner on the course? We call it the Awesomeness Club. And this took a life of its own, where people specifically report positive stories that happened to them because of the course. And that was, wasn't really even the naming came from the students. And now I later wrote a book about this MOOC, and there is a chapter in my book called the Awesomeness Club, which was totally, I never thought about it. It was totally the learners' contribution.
Which book is this?
Shoot the Boss.
Is it available here?
Oh, so the book is available out there for sale. Yeah.
What a coincidence. Thank you, Mushtak. I'd like to come back to Lara, and probably one more round with the panelists, and then we'll open it to Q&A. So audience, I hope you have your questions getting ready. Lara, so earlier you were telling me, you were sharing with me how you were running a workshop for... Who's the workshop for?
The workshop is for our Faculty of Engineering, Science and Engineering at the University, and so it's for the academics and the technical teams who support the academics.
Great. So we're talking about capacity of academics. So hopefully that's a theme for this last round. Where do you put the capacity of academics in, for instance, adopting social learning vis-a-vis online education, and kind of like what's being driven in your university, or even just within Australia generally, with regards to this? Yeah.
So, like every new market, what happens is that there are early adopters out there who see the potential and can sort of forecast the future and buy into the future, and they'll happily take up the tools, experiment, and they usually form informal communities of practice, and that has definitely happened at the university that I work at, but also we have cross-university informal teams where we all get together, we share what's happening, we share what's working, we share what new technologies are out there, and we are starting to publish together as a group, so we've created our own little community of practice, which is pretty exciting. And then when those things start taking hold, what's happening is that the university is seeing that the potential for this, and they're also seeing the gap between how academics view their role as educators and instructional designers and subject matter experts, and where the gap is between where they need to be and how they can be able to do their jobs. So one of the things that's happening is that a lot of educators are doing courses and we're doing workshops with them around understanding how to co-create things. So not in an educational setting, just how to work in a team to co-create things where everybody has input, there is social learning happening in the workshop, and then introducing them. Thank you. So behaviour first. Behaviour, as you were saying, it's behaviour. It's understanding the ways of doing things, the mindset that you need, then what behaviours work, and then layering on top of that the tools for social learning, whether that's in the classroom or online, or in our case, we do a hybrid method where we actually use online tools in the classroom with face-to-face, and then that carries on outside the classroom. So one of the big trends that I'm seeing is that there's a real recognition that we need to, as professional educators and researchers, is to develop a new skill set. One of the best things that's coming at it for me is that whilst there can be a bit of pushback from saying, I like to be the sage on the stage, I don't want to know when I'm wrong, I just want to tell people stuff and then they can do it. What's happening with practice and with assistance, people are starting to see how liberating it is to say, a student came up with this idea and we're now all going to embrace it. Or we build in a lot of reflection and a lot of fast iteration into our courses. They're very flexible. So if something is not working, we throw it out. And we put on the platform, this was not working, so we threw it out. And being able to admit that, fail fast, and help the learners have a better experience has really engaged our teaching and learning community. So in actual answer to your question, what we're seeing is happening is there's a pool of early adopters and people who love to embrace this. There's some resistance, and then there's the universities are starting to see, and we're doing a lot of the work now, is to enable educators and researchers to work in this way together so they actually can then have enough confidence to work in this way with students.
Sorry, just a very short answer, if possible, to the question of why do you call this, i.e. social learning amongst lecturers, a new market? Shouldn't they already know this?
They should... Yes. and it really is just breaking a habit. You know, we all know we should eat better and exercise, right? So
good point.
And for some of us, you can just wake up one day and some people can go, yeah, I'm just going to start jogging. And some people need a coach. Some people need an app. Some people need to work out how many steps they've got on their watch, you know. And so it's really providing that smorgasbord of tools, a buffet of tools to get from the couch to running 5Ks.
I wouldn't use the word buffet though, of tools.
I know, but slightly ironic. But to get off the couch and run 5Ks, everyone will need a different program, and that's what we're trying to provide them with.
All right, so thank you so much. So on academic capacity, so I know Dr. Rosna, you are one of the master trainers for ACAP. The ACAP is the National Higher Education Leadership Academy. And I suppose in your work in building the capacity of Malaysian educators, what do you see, how do you see social learning playing a role in doing that? Just a bit of context, I remember having a conversation with one of the university's assistant vice chancellors, and she was telling me that upon becoming a professor, that was the first time in her life that she was exposed to pedagogy from a more structured manner. In other words, as David mentioned, subject matter expert, nobody doubts your ability as a subject matter expert, but suddenly there was this whole new world of very different pedagogical approaches. So as a trainer, what do you see the challenges and I suppose the role of social learning in building the capacity of Malaysian educators?
I think it boils down to the way promotion is done at the university. What do the
promotion is done at university?
What does the university management value? What do they value? Do they value innovative pedagogy? Do they value constructivism in the classroom? Do they care, or do they just value about how many citations? It boils down to that first. I think it's the leadership of the university. It's the leadership of the department that determines whether social learning will take place in a manner that we envision to see. I think that is the biggest challenge is the mindset. I think having global-minded educational leaders, that is the challenge today. What do you mean by global-minded? It's not about traveling around the world, but having the mindset to save the world, being inclusive in practice. And social learning definitely will come automatically, because whatever we do is based on our needs, our interests. Where do our interests come from? Where does our value come from? From how we are going to be valued by the society, by the institution that we are serving for. If I'm working for UUM, for instance, okay, what do they value? But for people like me, I'm reaching towards the end of my career. Of course, I don't care much.
Oh, no.
But you're talking about the younger ones still going for promotion, still going for associate professorship, citation, etc. You ask me citation, I don't care. I do the best that I can, whatever matters to the society, be cited or non-cited. But I would like my voice to be heard. I mean, if everybody has that. But unfortunately, we're still living in this structural put in the university where you have to meet certain criteria, because this is the mission of the country, the mission of the university. But we can talk about ranking, etc. But if you go down to the grassroots, actually, you should see what is actually happening. Are we nurturing global-minded educational leaders that can serve, that can really change the mindset of the young ones? Unless we, leaders, becoming global-minded in our practices, inclusive practice, when we talk about inclusive practice, of course, social learning, by exchanging diversity in our approaches. There's no one size fits all, right? Unless we can embrace that, how can we expect our future generation embrace that? That's a challenge for us.
Thank you. Let's give that round of applause. I'm now very what's the word? I'm speechless.
I can be a bit emotional when it comes to this thing.
Oh no, that's fantastic.
We've been fighting.
Really
I've been with the university for 29 years, and I've seen the same thing repeating over and over again. I think.
And look, it's not something that's entirely new. Almost like this obsession towards, for instance, some citations for promotional purposes. That could be because it's easier to latch promotions to something that's quantifiable as opposed to something that's more qualitative in nature. But we'll get to that in a moment. Last question, then we'll open it to the floor. Mushtak. So I think just coming on from this, it's a question of I want to know more about social learning and online education, about fostering that sense of humanity. Because I think at its core, it is a question of values, recognizing what being humane is about, so that we can then move away from this, it's about research papers only, your citations only, etc. And you being someone very passionate about emotional well-being, and just the happiness concept, what are your thoughts?
What are my thoughts about?
Your thoughts about the role of, I would say, online education and social learning in nurturing humanity.
I'll go back to my emotional intelligence MOOC. When I wanted to, first I'm an engineer, wanting to teach a bunch of engineers about emotional intelligence. So that was an interesting thing in its own right at the beginning. But back then, people thought that, maybe courtesy of the AI Stanford MOOC, that MOOCs are a way to teach technical things. So how would you do something that is so difficult to define in a MOOC? And I think now when I say I have this MOOC and I have so many thousand, people say, oh, so as we all know, it's easier to teach the soft skills with a MOOC, but what about the other things? But anyway, that's a story for another time. So I think if you online learning, when it has so many people put in one place, it brings its own opportunities, and these are about. So let me say something before this, if you don't mind.
Sure, please.
I believe that we all tell stories about ourselves, about how the world works. I think learning new knowledge is about integrating new pieces into these stories. And this is important, but that's, to me, is not really education. I think education is changing the story so that it is more powerful, empowering, and positive. That's, to me, what is real education. And that often requires that you open up, you share, you be vulnerable. And there are certain things maybe you can do them in an online context even better than doing them in a face-to-face kind of context. And I think that's really the power, is to look for the things that can be done online better than being done in a face-to-face kind of way. So I give you an example. If you want people to share about themselves, I think it's easier to do this online. And sometimes if you are unable to share about your own experiences and how you are feeling, to see other people sharing, then you will learn how to share, and you will learn from other people's stories and experiences. So I think at the end of the day, if we are able to, for example, let me pick the topic of depression. I think the most powerful way of dealing with that, if someone comes and said, I suffered depression, these were the symptoms, this is how I sought help, and then people could actually come either to open up as well about it, to seek help, or even to provide support. So it's all about really leveraging that collective power that brings, when you have, for example, 10,000 people together sharing about their emotions, sharing the things that they've tried, the difficulties that you face, and that gives you the impression that maybe the challenge that you face is not unique to you. It's a human kind of thing, and only through that we could edit that story that we tell within our own minds, and hopefully edit it in a positive, powerful, and empowering manner.
Thank you very much, Mushtak, for that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go to the floor for Q&As. I'll take about 5 to 10 minutes because I'm aware we've got our professor next up. Don't want to take too much of her time. So, Dato' Satina, you have a question? Could we... we'll take 2 or 3 at a time, then it'll help us move along. And are there any questions on Slido as well? Just a second, Dato'. Just we can pull it up. Where's the Slido? Oh, no worries. Dato', why don't you please...
Thank you, Daniel. My question would be, actually, I would like to ask a question from... I would call you today the awesome Rosna, Prof. Rosna. I like what you said, and I'm very much with you. Basically, I'm Satina. I'm an educationist. I've been with the ministry for over 33 years. I have not stopped, and I'm still now, actually, by virtue today, actually, I'm also one of the members of the National Education Advisory Council. So it is so related to what you just said. And I also sit in one of the board for public universities, UPSI. I think I was really attracted to what you said just now, measuring, or what you said, that you are doing a survey on actually how do we measure students' learning in the university. But I want to go back to the K-12 education in schools. I think whatever is happening in the school, basically it will take it up to the university. You talk about pedagogy, you talk about citation in the university and so on. What are the things that need to be done? But most importantly, you said you don't really care about citation. You don't really care about so much of ranking. But how do you change actually the perception of students? How do you create these amazing, awesome students in the future? May I ask whether similar type of research or what you call this survey can be done at the level of schools? Because I think we are struggling a lot about schools. So can you at least relate to us? Because we could use this probably in our meeting. And I would want to bring that so that we can really measure. This is the biggest issue, Daniel, as you know.
Understood, yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato'. Shall we take any more from the audience first? Then we can take 2, at least then we can manage our time better. Okay, gentlemen.
Hi.
Introduce yourself, please, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm Izwan from UiTM Muka, that's in Sarawak. So, Professor Dr. Rosna, if you don't mind indulging me for a bit, I'm quite new in this whole education bit. I've previously finished my PhD in nothing to do with education. But when I was transferred to Sarawak, I've noticed that there's a severe lack in students' engagement in their classrooms. So I've, for now, dropped my interest in molecular biology and moved on to education for now. But what I've noticed is that I need your opinion on how do you cater to the needs of the students by addressing this whole open learning thing and allowing more flexibility and addressing different behaviors of the students. Well, at the same time, especially in UiTM, you're kind of, you have to fulfill the course learning outcomes and the program learning outcomes, whereby, for example, part 1 students, semester 1 students, they are required to just focus on first cognitive levels, level 1, 2, or 3. So it's more memorization. But to me, I feel that is very restrictive. It is not good for the students' development. But if we were to, let's say I just bulldoze and teach the way I want to teach, well, sooner or later, exit policy lah. So I'd rather not have that. So in your opinion, what would be the best approach to go about this?
Okay, thank you very much, Izwan, for the question. I think, Prof, you've got some questions with you. We'll let you answer that. And of course, for Lara and Mushtak, we've got some sliders, so we'll take them after this. Okay.
Okay, when I mention I don't care about ranking, it doesn't mean I don't care that it is important. Ranking is important for the country. What I mean, I do the best that I can. Whether it is we get into ranking, I don't care. But if we do good, we go into ranking. Yes. Ranking to me is the consequence. It's not the making of it. Purpose. It's the consequence of good behavior. But coming back to Datuk Satina, I think at the young school, kindergarten, you mean? I mean, from preschool to school. Actually, when we developed the instrument, it is meant for late adolescent, for undergraduates at that certain age. Surely we should be able to replicate similarly to the preschool or kindergarten, but definitely do it using different framework, different instrument. I kind of forgot what actually you asked.
So in case of education, what needs to be done? How do you create awesome students, considering the struggles that students in schools are facing?
Okay. It comes from the designer of the classroom. Be it online or face-to-face. I think the same question, I think I can combine one for children, one for adolescent, I think. What we need is a designer who knows how to teach learners what works, what ticks in that particular context. And there's no one size fits all. Maybe in my class, I use PBL. Maybe in your class, you use case study in different things. But the knowledge, having the knowledge to have inclusive practice, meaning that to have a repertoire of knowledge about the approaches to teaching is what we need. And to do that, we need to change the teacher's mindset. Begin with the end in mind. You are the architect in your classroom, the designer of your classroom.
Have you engaged with teachers?
Yes, I do. For instance, at ACAP, we used to have, no longer, we used to have 2 modules, learning engagement and motivation, and also learner diversity. These are 2 modules, is more into the psychological perspective. I think psychology is the crux of the matter, how to engage, how to teach learners, how to interest, how to move from situational interest to personal interest. I think for MOOC, people with personal interest, personal disposition for certain topic, no issue at all. They will complete the MOOC because they have personal interest and there is a cost attached to it. I'm going to get a job based on that certificate. But if you're talking about study history, going to MOOC, well, you really had to work hard with the subject matter expert and also the instructional designer. But at the same time, the technological know-how, to transfer all this face-to-face into online, you need a lot of technical expertise working together, not we working alone. Like what is happening in university right now, without support of ID, instructional designer, it's very challenging for us to invest time to develop MOOC, for instance.
So universities and schools need more instructional designers.
The same thing.
The same thing. Are there enough at the moment? I don't know. No? No, so there are some heads shaking, like learning designers. Okay, interesting. So I hope that's answered the questions. Of course, you can speak to Prof. Rose shortly. Moving on to the Slido, Lara and Mushtak. Sorry, we've got to turn around. The question right on top, that's a lot of likes. How can we deal with how can we deal with a digital gap in rural and urban environment in social learning? Who would like to take this question? Mushtak, okay, very quick. Okay, go for it.
Honestly, I'm not sure there is any digital, what's it called?
Gap.
Digital gap.
You're saying there's no?
I don't think there is a digital gap. You see, we had maybe 30, 40 years ago, the gap was economic gap. Some people have, people don't have. Then I think we moved to the digital gap, which probably was 20 years ago or so, and I think the digital gap is closed now. I was reading for Thomas Friedman, who was following the refugees through Africa, going from the South Africa through Libya, trying to cross the Mediterranean to Europe. And he said these people had very little money, if at all, but every one of them had a smartphone. Every one of them was connected. The gap that we have now is a motivational gap. There are people who are motivated to learn. The information is there, the tools are there, and there are people who are not motivated to learn. And I think this is the true thing that we need to work on. I want to give you a personal example. My son goes to a private international school, and I still have to get him a tutor for mathematics to sit with him every day, every week, or twice a week sometimes, to actually take him through the process, because the moment you take that from him, he is not that motivated to he just go and watches YouTube and do all sorts of other things online. So I think the key thing is, how do we create that motivation? And it's a very, very difficult challenge. It's doable, but it's very difficult. I think there is also the motivation for the academics, and this is something we can talk about later as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering, like, the person who asked the question asking about the gap, probably because in the mind, even I would think there is a rural-urban gap, but you're saying that there isn't. Very, very interesting, but let's move on. Lara, would you like to add to this, or would you like to take another question?
I'm going to add to it super quickly.
Please,
so
by all
the gap actually is not the technology in someone's hand. The gap is designing learning experiences that are relevant and resonant to those people with just the phone in their hand, so they're motivated. It's actually a gap of design, not a gap of technology.
I like that, gap of design. Cool. And let's look at the second most popular question. How to encourage academics to learn through social learning? A comment from previous speaker. Academics forget how to learn. They focus on refinement.
I love this question. Whoever did this question, I'll see you outside for a coffee and a high five. And really, academics do forget. We forget that we are learners, and we actually forget, because we're into that, it's like a pyramid of learning where you get a base level in your area of expertise, and then you go up and up and up into refinement and a deep dive. Actually, when we start with something like social learning, you have to start at the bottom of the pyramid, and academics forget what it's like to be at an entry level in anything, in any area of expertise. We've found that to bridge that and to make it easier, and also, actually, something that everybody's been talking about today is how do we change things? We create diverse teams. So there is an academic who's a subject matter expert and maybe a learning designer, but also in my teams I create with a learning designer, someone who's really good with social media, someone has nothing to do with education, is just awesome with social media, is awesome at creating content. And usually in the design team, we have someone who is representative of the learners. So they become our touch point. They're our persona. We say to them, does this make sense to you? Can you use it? Do you like it? Do you think it's easy to connect with others? So we have these really diverse teams, and so sometimes you might get, we've also been trialling a lot of stuff where we have a learning experience. There's first year undergraduates, PhD students, third years, people from corporate, and other educators all in teams together. and we actually work out what works across the board and what works for each of those sub-segments. And then we feed it back into the community to say, this type of learner likes this, these types of learners like this type. Here are all the tools that you can use, and this is how they're relevant to all the different types of learners. But the most important learning that I've had in the last sort of 2 or 3 years is creating those diverse teams with different perspectives actually accelerates the speed at which you can create really fantastic resonating learning experiences.
Thank you. And I know there's often talk about getting students involved in like the board or the senate of universities. I think that's often overlooked, right? The perspectives matter, and that was very nice. Prof, you wanted to add a little bit? Okay, we're running out of time, so I think you can finish up here, okay. And then maybe one last comment from Mushtak and Lara, and then we'll close it. Yeah.
Okay, very quickly, because for those who are asking that question, I think there's a huge literature in cognitive psychology, the difference in novice and expert learners, and also sometimes if you work. Even if you work with your team members, for instance, those first-class superstars sometimes, if you have staff from first class, sometimes it's difficult to gain empathy from them. The same thing with teachers. We forgot that after 10 years, you become expert. During the first year teaching at university, you just about the same knowledge with them. But after 10 years, you thought you're getting a student becoming poor and poor student, weak student we're getting, but actually we're forgetting we're becoming expert. So expert sometimes it's difficult for them to empathize students learning. The same thing is staff. If you're working with a team with expert staff, sometimes they don't understand the struggle that we are facing.
Okay, thank you. So last words, you can choose to say something general or you can do one. I'll give you all 1 minute. You have a workshop, Mushtak.
Okay, I just wanted to add about the social learning for staff. I think one way to see it is social learning is not only about the learners, it's about the facilitator as well. So let me just give you an example. I think social learning is also about being aware of the emotions. And I can share something from my own experience. I could have a classroom that has 100 students who are really paying attention to me, and I just ignore all of them, and I look at 2 people who are talking to each other, they are not paying attention, and that makes me feel really, really bad. So I think the fact that, and there is actually 2 people here, but anyway, so and by the way, did not even know they are so absorbed in what they are doing. But you see, I think this is very important. I wanted to add one more thing also about, there was a question about introverts and is this for them? Look, all these kids that we have now, all these learners that we have in our classroom, they need to go out there and get a job. And often they need to be able to interact with people. I think I'm not very sure that there are people who are incapable of, working with others, but I think we need to, even if someone is introvert, and I don't know what does that exactly mean, but even if there's someone who's like that, we would like to introduce them to the social learning so that they develop these skills, because they will need them when they go out of our classroom so that they are effective members of the community and so that they can get a job.
Someone wrote at the back, educators should be taught to deal with emotion. Right behind you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. And Lara?
2 micro comments. A, one of the biggest skills that we can all learn is how to use our empathy muscle. It's about being empathetic, understanding the world from the learner's eyes, from your co-creator's eyes, from the people on the platform's eyes. Actually learning how to use empathy positively is so important for learners and facilitators, A. And B, we're moving into a world, I think, where credentialism, just I've got the piece of paper, is way less important than I have the skills and I can demonstrate that I have the skills, techniques and abilities. And if there's one thing that particularly platforms can do, it helps us focus on the skills and the outcomes for the learners as opposed to just the input from the teacher and the piece of paper at the end.
I like that. Platforms help us focus on our skills and our learners. Prof. Okay.
Oh, we're having another round.
Oh,
That's
I'm so sorry. Okay,
Wrap up.
30 seconds.
I think we have not challenged, from the university perspective, I think we have not been able to challenge learners' mind enough yet. We have not been able to provoke their thinking, to think reflectively, to think interrogatively through our assessment in the classroom, through our activities in the classroom. We need to do much more to provoke the thinking, to arouse the curiosity. By then, I think motivation is an sort of instinctive thing for them.
So thank you very much to our panels. Please give them a round of applause. In the interest of time, we will be continuing on with the next session. So once again, thank you very much. I know there are some questions here that we haven't had time to answer. So please feel free to approach them over lunch. They'll also be here a little bit more throughout the day. You've been a great audience as well. And there's of course workshops? Yep, so Lara as well as Mushtak will be having workshops, but there are also 2 other great workshops happening. I've got to be fair to everybody. So, so yes, we hope you look forward to the sessions that are coming up. Sui, back to you. Thank you very much.